The much-awaited meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and his South African counterpart, Cyril Ramaphosa, ended in high drama at the Oval Office. Trump appeared to ambush his guest with a video depicting alleged white genocide in South Africa. In the process, a joint briefing session turned into a face-off under the glare of international media. However, Ramaphosa calmly clarified the situation in his country. At the heart of the tensions lie South Africa's land reform policies and bold positions on global issues. This week on the program, we unpack the outcomes of President Ramaphosa's visit to the United States and what the future may hold for South Africa-U.S. relations. I'm Penina Karibe. Welcome to Talk Africa. The outcomes of the mission will have wide-reaching impact on relations between the two countries. Before we begin our discussion, my colleague Julie Shire brings us more on how the meeting was received in South Africa.
It was like walking a tightrope when the South African delegation met with United States President Donald Trump at the White House. The bombshell came when Trump pulled out the unfounded genocide card. President Cyril Ramaphosa dealt with it like a match-winning birdie on the 18th hole, reiterating that it's not happening, which he later addressed with the media.
The issue that he kept raising, or he raised prominently, is the issue of genocide. And when he was asked by one of you, and thank God one of you asked, whether he was convinced that there was genocide, he says, no, he's not convinced. Much as he flighted the video and all those press clippings. And in the end, I mean, I do believe that there's doubt and disbelief in his head about all this.
His entourage of politicians, high-profile businessmen and golfers also played a vital role in strengthening Pretoria's case. Farm murders, while part of a general crime trend South Africa is grappling with, is a slim narrative pushed by South African-born Elon Musk, a close advisor to Trump, desperate to get his Starlink satellite service into his home country. This is not the only contentious issues plaguing the troubled romance. Ramaphosa extended an olive branch by inviting Trump to the G20 later this year, of which the U.S. is an important member. But South Africa's ever-growing relationship with the global South nations and a jab at Israel over its conflict with Palestine could overshadow Trump's decision.
With South Africa being a member of the BRICS, bringing a case at the International Court of Justice, it's not in the sort of diplomatic good books of the United States. And the US is now losing more friends than it's winning. And that's what it comes down to.
While the president is also eager to keep the trade levers rolling, ordinary South Africans impacted by the resulting economic fallout of aid cuts and growing trade tensions weighed in on the visit.
It was very strategic. He is a very strategic person. Indeed, he has good leadership qualities by standing up tall and going and face Mr. Donald Trump and just explaining actually to what is going on in South Africa. People they spread the rumors that there is genocide in our country, whereas there is not.
They must tell all these small parties, like we saw the video that I saw, the recordings from the opposition leader, Malema. It wasn't good what he said in those, and let's say he must learn from that mistake and not just be to go to that extent of saying killing is not a solution.
The meeting at the White House is just the first step in what could be a long, drawn-out political game for Pretoria. The real tests will come in navigating the prickly hurdles that underpin tension with Washington. Pretoria's focus is on securing vital investment, keeping trade deals intact, and the avenues of diplomacy open, which may ultimately decide the nature of future relations between the United States and South Africa. Julie Shire, CGTN, Cape Town.
Joining me now to unpack President Cyril Ramaphosa's visit to the United States are from Cape Town, Emma Powell, Member of Parliament for the Democratic Alliance and the Shadow Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. Also in Cape Town, Dr. Oscar Van Heerden, a Senior Research Fellow at the Center for African Diplomacy and Leadership at the University of Johannesburg. And joining us from Maryland, United States, is Bill Fletcher, trade unionist and former president of the Trans-Africa Forum. Welcome everyone to the program, and thank you very much for joining us. So my first question will go to all three of you, and Dr. Van Heerden, I'll begin with you. The much-awaited meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and his South African counterpart Cyril Ramaphosa eventually did take place. What are your thoughts about that meeting?
Well, as you say, it is long overdue. At first, the Trump administration didn't seem interested in wanting to meet with the South African government. They met with all kinds of other groups, Afri-Forum, conservative right-wing groups, Solidarity, and indeed also with the official opposition, the Democratic Alliance. But finally, we see that the meeting happened between the South African government and the Trump administration. I think we always knew that it was going to be a heated exchange, especially with the malarkey and the untruths and lies that President Trump has been insisting on with regards to farm killings, land grabs, and white genocide. So it was always going to be a difficult meeting, but I do think in the end, the South African delegation, particularly President Ramaphosa, conducted himself with poise, with composure and dignity, and tried to very gently dispel some of these notions.
Emma, what about you? What are your thoughts on that meeting?
Well, it was indeed an uncomfortable but very necessary and long overdue engagement. It provided an opportunity for our president and members of his cabinet, which include members of the coalition government in South Africa, including the leader of the party that I represent, the Democratic Alliance, to have mature and cordial discussions in regards to some of the issues that Donald Trump has been highlighting since he assumed his position as 47th President of the United States. There were moments in that meeting, I believe, that were incredibly tense and that could have descended into chaos, but it was the maturity of all parties present in that room that prevented the descent of that discussion into some of the chaotic scenes that we've seen with presidents from other countries. I think that it was also a very timeous opportunity for our national leaders to present fact-based responses to some of the accusations about the domestic landscape in South Africa that are necessary, specifically in regards to some of the lobbying efforts that have been made by, as Dr. Van Heerden says, far-right wing lobbying groups in Washington, D.C. Overall, I think that we had a positive outcome and we're now out of the starting blocks, and I think that only further mature discussions can come from here.
Right. And Bill, what's your take on what went on at the Oval Office?
I think that the meeting was an insult to people of African descent around the planet. I don't think that there was any level of maturity on the part of President Trump. I think that what we actually saw was unbelievable in that President Trump attempted to drown out President Ramaphosa. So let's be clear, this was an insult. And there were, I would disagree with President Ramaphosa's approach to the meeting, although I respect him. I think that President Trump could have been countered not only by more facts about what is actually happening in South Africa, but maybe taking President Trump a little bit through history. And I realize in the United States, we actively oppose history and embrace myth. I understand that. But it would have been very good, it would have been a good lesson for President Ramaphosa to have taken President Trump through a history of South Africa, a little bit about something called settler colonialism, a little bit more about apartheid, to raise his understanding and to blow away this nonsense about white genocide.
Right. So, Dr. Van Heerden, let's put this meeting into context. What are some of the issues that have built up between the US and South Africa in the last few months?
Well, there's a number of things as per the so-called, allegations contained in the executive order of President Trump, where he makes the case that indeed there's this supposed white genocide that's taking place. He lumps South Africa with so-called axis of evil because we have relations with China, Russia, and with Iran. And then he also mentions the fact that South Africa dares to take a strategic ally such as the State of Israel to the International Court of Justice for the crime of genocide in Gaza. So those are some of the tension points that was there and sort of was the framework within which this meeting took place. I also want to just add to what Bill is saying, because at the end of the day, what I saw, there's an old adage from Turkey that says that when a clown enters a palace, the clown does not become the king. Instead, the palace becomes a circus. And that's really what we saw taking place. Cheap parlor tricks to try and continue a malarkey of lies around white genocide, targeted farm killings of white farmers, and a dispossession and persecution of whites in South Africa through laws that is trying to correct a historical injustice called racist laws, according to Elon Musk and Trump. So, I think the world saw a very cheap attempt at cheap diplomacy and cheap politics. And, what I find quite astonishing is why the people around Trump does not want to tell the emperor that the emperor is naked.
Wow. So, Emma, that meeting, it began cordially. I mean, Ramaphosa began the meeting by focusing very heavily on trade and investment between the two countries. But then Trump responded with claims of alleged white genocide taking place in South Africa. What are your thoughts about the Ramaphosa-Trump meeting? Was it a success?
Ultimately, I think it was absolutely a success. It could have gone in either direction, and there were moments that we were all concerned, specifically when that video started playing. Now, the facts of the matter are that there is no white genocide in South Africa. South Africa has got a broad crime problem. It is a crisis. We have over 27,000 of our 60 million citizens that are murdered each year, about 57,000 women who are raped in this country each year. Farm murders are indeed a crisis, and they do require specialized responses in terms of drone technologies and various evidence-based specialized responses. But they are not the only category of crime in this country that the United States should be concerned about. Equally, whilst there is a deeply concerning act that has been promulgated by the President, the Expropriation Without Compensation Act, the party that I represent in Parliament, which forms the second largest stakeholder in national government, we have taken that act to court to challenge its constitutionality. And at present, there are no state-sponsored land grabs. There are land grabs that are orchestrated by various criminal syndicates, but it's certainly not orchestrated at the state level. So I believe that it was an important exchange of accusations and responses that I think will now open the door to a more mature relationship going forward, where we can continue to enhance our cooperation and bilateral ties with our second largest trade partner.
Right. So, Dr. Van Heerden, you are part of the African National Congress Strategic Support Team. What impact will this meeting have on the overall relationship between South Africa and the United States?
I think a lot of people are walking away from this meeting with great respect for President Ramaphosa, understanding the difficulty sitting in the Oval Office with a person such as Donald Trump, who is a disruptor, wants to put you on the back foot in order to negotiate deals in his or her favor. I think everyone understands that. And I think here the issue is, how is Africa going to be interacting with the United States? How is the region of SADC going to interact with the United States? And indeed, as Emma says, it is about AGOA. I think that we know the Trump administration is anti-multilateral trade agreements. They prefer bilateral agreements. I think come September, the AGOA is going to be off the table, and he's going to engage individually. Hence, the engagement with South Africa, with Minister Steenhuisen, with Minister Parks-Tau, trying to zoom in on very specific trade-related issues.
Right. So, Bill, watching all of this from the United States, how do you interpret Trump's approach to South Africa? And what are the lessons for African countries as they navigate relations with the United States?
That the issue of national sovereignty, but also the collective sovereignty of Africa is really at stake. And I want to build on what Dr. Hirden was raising. I think that President Ramaphosa may have thought that he was going into a meeting with a fellow businessman, not just a president, but a fellow businessman, and that they would be able to speak as two businessmen to each other. And that was a misanalysis. I think that there are clearly differences around foreign policy. I think that the issue remains of whether one agrees or disagrees with choices by South Africa. Does South Africa have the right to determine its own foreign policy, or does it need to get on its knees in front of King Donald? I think that that really is a question. So I believe that that there is a danger, and it will be an effort to try to get the best deal for the United States to the disadvantage of Africa. And if there was ever a need for a stronger African Union, if there was ever a need for stronger African regional organizations, it is now. Because the future in the absence of that does not look good at all.
All right, so we're going to take a short break now, and when we come back, we will look at what the future may hold for South Africa-U.S. relations. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Still with me are Emma Powell, Dr. Oscar Van Heerden, and Bill Fletcher. Before the break, we looked at the outcomes of South Africa's high-level visit to the U.S. Let's now look at what the future may hold for relations between these two countries. So, Emma, I'm going to come to you for this one. Ramaphosa described the meeting as a great success, and he said South Africa was able to achieve re-engagement with the United States to put the issues of investment and trade on the table. What exactly was discussed around these areas?
Well, we're not exactly sure. We haven't had public readouts yet. We believe that those are still going to be forthcoming. But what we know is, I would agree with Dr. Van Heerden that AGOA is most likely dead in the water. Even if it passes through a congressional renewal, it might not muster executive support. Both are required, given that it expires this year, which means that South Africa now needs to work towards brokering a strategic trade and investment framework as a precursor, or you could say an on-ramp to a formal bilateral trade deal, which, as you would know, takes many years to broker. So it's going to be absolutely critical, especially for our trade minister, Minister Parks-Tau, and our agricultural minister, who's also my party leader, Minister John Steenhuisen, to start negotiating frantically with their counterparts in the sectors such as automotives and agriculture, which are really the two largest sectors of export to the United States, to try and get some kind of strategic framework going. I believe that it's also crucial that our presidency and foreign ministry begin re-engaging the United States on some of the development aid that has constituted the long-standing relationship. So, for example, the President's emergency program on AIDS relief that was started under former President Bush PEPFAR, contributes about 8 billion rand to South Africa. That's about 450 million US dollars to provide HIV/AIDS relief. And clinics across South Africa are now shutting because that funding has been scrapped.
Okay, Bill, what do you think? Did Trump make any concessions at the end of that meeting?
I didn't hear any concessions. I mean, maybe he did. I'm unclear, except for diplomatic reasons, how President Ramaphosa could believe that was a positive meeting. I mean, he can say whatever he wants for diplomatic reasons, but in the real world, there was nothing that was demonstrable. It was clear that President Trump wanted to use the meeting to smear President Ramaphosa with horse dung. And whether there were concessions made privately, I don't know. It's not clear. But again, I believe that if AGOA is going to die, that African countries right now, rather than pulling back and digging in individually, are going to need to discuss collectively their relationship with the United States. And in that sense, I think, for example, that South Africa needs to be more involved in coming to a solution of the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And what that means in terms of the United States, these different ideas that have been floated in Trump circles about, in effect, grabbing control of parts of the DRC. African countries need to discuss what their relationship must be with the United States in order for each of them to survive.
Dr. Van Heerden, before this meeting, Ramaphosa's office had said the aim was to reset relations, and Ramaphosa was quoted as saying, whether the two countries like it or not, they are joined at the hip. Break down this for us, joined at the hip. What does it mean?
What it means is, in the early 90s, President Bill Clinton asked his State Department to give him a list of 10 countries that he couldn't ignore. South Africa was on that list for a host of reasons. The largest economy on the continent currently in terms of purchasing power, the most diverse economy, and so on and so forth. That has not changed with subsequent administrations, Republican or Democrats. The real difference and change came when Trump took office for, both in terms of his first term in the 2016s, as well as this time around, having this malarkey and lies about white South Africans being persecuted. So that's where things changed. And we must ask the question, why? What has made that change? I think that even his demeanor, even though he tried to embarrass the South Africans, his demeanor was such that he kept the door open, still wanting to talk, because he knows that there are deals to be made. Minister Tau has informed us that both him and Minister Steenhuisen has spoken to their counterparts around LNG gas that will be purchased from the Americans, preferential access being given to critical minerals, exploration can be done jointly, and investment from the Americans, which they liked, and a number of other things that was on the table. So certainly the South Africans are going to come home with a few goodies, as indicated by President Ramaphosa. But the truth of the matter is that in terms of our future diplomatic relations, I think the next 4 years is going to remain tense with the Trump administration. We would have to navigate those choppy waters and hope that we come out the other side. And perhaps then, with the 2029 elections, we might be able to rebuild on the past relationship that South Africa enjoyed with the United States.
As we wrap up, my final question will go to all three of you. Emma, I will begin with you. What do you envision for South Africa-U.S. relations in the coming years? What recommendations would you provide to both the U.S. and South African governments?
Well, I would like to see us re-establish the PEPFAR relationship, because PEPFAR wasn't just beneficial to treating HIV and AIDS in South Africa, but it was incredibly beneficial to the United States as well, because the research that was coming out of South Africa in regards to AIDS, HIV, and tuberculosis was some of the best research in the world. We were in fact very close to a vaccine. So I'd like to see the re-establishment of PEPFAR. I would like to see the re-establishment of US aid programs that benefit both of our countries' strategic priorities, such as combating illicit wildlife trafficking, securing our oceans from illegal fishing, and all sorts of other cooperation in the security sectors. I would, of course, like to see our automotive sector in South Africa continue to grow, so a targeted trade deal around automotives. I think we as two nations have a lot to share. We certainly share the same values. We are both constitutional democracies who have free and fair democratic elections, multi-party parliaments. We share a lot in terms of our values, and I believe that we need to continue building on that relationship.
Okay, what about you, Dr. Van Heerden? What do you envision for South Africa-U.S. relations in the coming years, and even recommendations you would provide to both governments?
It's expected that there should be friendly relations between the two countries, that there should be trade that happens between the two countries. I think everyone wants that. I simply don't trust the Trump administration that it's going to be doing that. I suspect that if you want to attack a country, you can't attack a good guy. You have to paint that person or that country in a corner, make it a bad guy so that you can attack that country. I think that relations are going to worsen between the United States and South Africa. I think that there are going to be sanctions. That's going to be the next step against some of the leaders of government in South Africa and possibly political parties. I think the situation is going to worsen in as much as we want to and should encourage good relations and good trade. I think that Trump is on a trajectory where he's setting South Africa up to be the bad guy.
Okay, and Bill, what is your perspective?
I don't think that this is a matter of picking winners and losers. I think this is a matter of insisting upon respect. And I think that that's not something that should be very hard to insist upon in the relationship between the United States and South Africa. One thing that I think will be very important will be, particularly because there's an active campaign in the United States to promote the idea of the white replacement theory and to deny history. I think that it would be very important for South Africa and other African countries, in alignment with African Americans here in the United States, to move a broad-based discussion about colonialism, about the ramifications, about what has actually happened, and to counter this white genocide argument. I don't think that this is something to just brush off as the rants of some insane politician. This is a deeply held fascist belief, and we must oppose it. And I think that while there must be efforts to improve trade relations between South Africa and the United States, countering the white replacement narrative is going to be critically important in terms of blunting all of the misguidance from the Trump administration.
An interesting conversation we've had, and that's all for this edition of Talk Africa. A very big thank you to our guests, Emma Powell, Member of Parliament for the Democratic Alliance and the Shadow Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Oscar Van Heerden, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for African Diplomacy and Leadership at the University of Johannesburg, and Bill Fletcher, trade unionist and former president of the Trans-Africa Forum. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles on Facebook and X. You can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist. Do keep the conversation going and join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Penina Karibe, and the team here in Nairobi. Until next time, it's goodbye.